All right, guys, day 14 of Peter Nimble. Let's finish the chapter. We're just getting ready to fight. And the king is going after Peter, and he's almost got to the top of these stairs that kind of led to a dead end for Peter. So let's see. Remember your nature above all things. All through the journey, Peter had assumed he had meant that somewhere inside him lived a noble warrior. But maybe he was saying the opposite, that Peter wasn't a warrior, but a dirty, sneaky thief. The greatest thief who ever lived. And why couldn't a thief be a hero? He suddenly understood how all the trials of his life, abandonment, Mr. Seamus, the just deserts, had prepared him for this moment. He gasped for breath and his heart swelled with a new desire to fight. This time, though, he would fight the way he knew best. He started with the rascal's questions. Where was he? Dangling 50 feet above ground, choking to death. Were there friends nearby? He could hear his sister struggling by the stairs, but she was too far away to help. Were there weapons nearby? His fishhook was lying useless on the ground below, leaving him only his hands. But his were no ordinary hands. Peter knew that the king's mechanical suit was no different from any of the locks he had spent his life mastering. All he had to do was find a way in. He focused his every sense of the tick-tock of clockwork before him. He could hear every gear and piston running together toward a narrow gap just below the king's heart. That was his keyhole. This realization, of course, happened in an instant. From Incarnadine's perspective, there was no difference between the boy he had raised above the platform and the boy he was staring at now. No difference but the faintest trace of a smile. Farewell, dear nephew, the king said as he drew back his sword. Say hello to my brother for me. Peter plunged his hand straight into the armor. He screamed as clockwork chewed through skin and fingernail and bone, and the pain of 1,000 hot pokers ripped through him. He slipped from the king's grip and collapsed at the edge of the platform. With all Peter's screaming, it took Incarnadine a moment to realize that he hadn't succeeded in running his nephew through. In fact, his arm was still raised over his head, just as it had been. The gears had stopped whirring, and within seconds, every joint of his terrible armor was locked in place, rendering him completely immobile. What manner of curse is this? He strained against the frozen suit. What have you done to me? Peter was hunched at his feet, overcome with pain, but still alive. What I was born to do, he said with a triumphant gasp. He raised his trembling, bloody hand to reveal a tiny brass pin, no bigger than a bodkin. Impossible! The king jerked his head about. You're just a child! There's no such thing as just a child, a voice spoke from behind. The king craned his neck and saw Peg limping up the steps. She placed a hand on his body, gave a mighty shove. Incarnadine tumbled off the ledge and crashed into the ground below, piercing his throat on the silver fishhook. There he lay broken and bleeding, unable to wiggle free from the armor he had constructed. With a final gurgle, he went limp, and thus King Incarnadine died just as the backstabber's blight had predicted, like a miserable worm. A silence came over the eating hall. The adults were terrified beyond words. Never in their wildest imaginings did they think that their mighty ruler could be killed. Those monsters murdered our king, one woman cried, covering her mouth. Panic swelled through the crowd as people started for the exits. Peg helped her brother to his feet and stood beside him. She took a deep breath and shouted with all of her might, Order, subjects! For once, Peg's words got through. Every man, woman, and child instantly stopped what they were doing and stared up at her. The princess composed herself and went on. The man you worshipped as king was an impostor. 10 years ago, he seized this land from its true ruler, King Hazelgood. She took Peg's good hand in her own. Today, she took Peter's good hand in her own. Today, we, his heirs, have returned to avenge his death and claim what is rightfully ours. Adults' faces were flushed with confusion. Peter squeezed his sister's hands, urging her to go on. The girl took a breath. Everything the king told you was a lie. Your homes were prisons. Your feasts, poison. The monsters he commanded you to kill were not monsters, but your own children. There were a few shocked gasps as people struggled with this horrifying idea. Peg pointed to where Lillian stood with protective arms around her son. That woman is one of you. Her real name is Lillian. The boy standing beside her is her child. Her very own. Lillian drew her precious Timothy closer, and the two hugged as if they might crush the world between them. Somewhere in this room is your own child, Peg said, voice trembling. It's time you meet each other. Many a historian will tell you that a great performance is just such a matter of timing as it is material. After missing their breakfast and supper doses of devil's dram, the grown-ups were no longer affected by the king's drug. When the princess spoke the truth to them, they studied the dirty-faced slaves standing before them and, as if waking from slumber, staggered backward, overcome by the truth about their perfect lives. Spears clattered to the ground as the adults remembered how they had been made to forget the cursed birthday, how they had lived as prisoners for all these years, and how they had nearly just murdered their own children. At that very moment, Longclaw and his horde charged into the eating hall, weapons high. They had been expecting to join forces with the king's army, gobble whatever children remained, and then crush the ravens once and for all. But upon entering, they were greeted by a different sight altogether. The adults' weapons were thrown across the floor. Still more alarming, Incarnadine was nowhere to be found. Longclaw scanned the scene with some confusion. Where is he? He snarled at the frightened people. Where's your ruler? Up here, a small voice called out. Longclaw looked to see two children almost identical standing at the top of the clock tower stairs. The one with the bandage across his eye stepped forward. My sister and I have reclaimed what was rightfully ours. Your king is no more. You two? The ape was now grinning. For years he had fantasized about seizing the palace for his own, stopped short only by his fear of the king's deadly armor. But now it seemed his moment had arrived. Even with the ravens perched against the walls, the ape enjoyed a distinct advantage. Well, your majesties, he said, stepping closer, the way I count it, you're outnumbered. Not quite. The girl stepped to her brother's side. Subjects, she called out, turning her brilliant gaze once more upon them. These are the jailers who kept your children as slaves. They tormented us for 10 long years, and now they threaten us once more. How will you answer them? As one, every man, woman, and child seized a weapon from the ground and faced the horde. The princess raised a spear above her head. Then let us put an end to this cursed battle. At last. Tomorrow will begin chapter 31, The Blessed Reunion. It's only about 5 pages. Last chapter, then we'll start the new one.